Welcome to the Cultivation Cast by Black Dog LED with Kevin and Noah. In this podcast series, we will cover all things related to indoor cannabis cultivation. I'm Noah. I'm one of the owners of Black Dog LED, and I've been growing indoors for a bit over 10 years, and I've been with Black Dog for about 7 years.
And I'm Kevin. I've been with Black Dog for over 6 years now. I've been growing indoors under artificial lights for over 30 years.
So in these podcasts, we're going to cover everything that we can with regard to cannabis cultivation. Every time we do one, it's going to be a different topic, and we are open to suggestions from all of our listeners. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll cover that at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, so this week we're going to give a brief introduction of Black Dog LED, kind of where Black Dog LED came from and what it is that we do.
So we'll start with the history of Black Dog LED. Black Dog LED was founded in 2010 by a gentleman who was looking to grow indoors in Colorado thanks to the new laws that were put into place right around that time. And he had experience growing with HPS. He did not want to deal with the heat, the fire risk, and all the stuff that goes along with HPS. And at that point, LEDs were being released. He purchased a couple of them online and found that they didn't work and they were kind of garbage. But luckily, he realized he could build a better light. So he went down the path of building an LED grow light that would meet his needs for growing cannabis indoors. And Black Dog LED was born.
Since that time, we've actually gone through numerous different product series. Depending on how you count, we're on our third or fifth or sixth iteration now with the new Phytomax 2 lights. One of the wonderful things about LEDs in general is that the technology keeps increasing and getting better every year, just like with cell phones and computers. So we stay on top of the latest technological advancements, always putting the latest in LED technology into our lights. And we're actually one of the oldest LED grow light manufacturers in existence. All of our lights are now made here in the United States of America with only the highest quality parts that we can get.
Black Dog LED has a few things that we focus on. People always ask us, or I should say one of the most common questions we get is, why Black Dog over other LEDs? You know, a long time ago, it used to be why LED over HPS, but people have come to realize that LEDs do produce the yields they want. And of course, the quality is well above HPS. So the question we get nowadays is why Black Dog over other companies? And simply put, we focus on two primary things, and that's power and spectrum. Excuse me. And that's power and spectrum. First off, we focus on power because being that we focus on cannabis, we know you need real power to produce the yields we're looking for. So we make the largest lights available for indoor horticultural applications today. The other thing we focus on is spectrum. We have what we believe to be the most complete spectrum available on the market. We go all the way from UV to IR. So if you want to say, what is Black Dog about? It's really power and spectrum so we can deliver the quality and yields you're looking for.
Our spectrum is also specifically tuned to actually elicit certain responses in growing plants. So where it has been shown scientifically that pretty much any color of visible light gives the plant the same amount of photosynthetic energy. Therefore, any color of light will pretty much do as far as growing plants is concerned. That's not looking at its actual effect on the complete plant. That's just looking at how well it photosynthesizes. So we actually have designed our spectrum to actually control how the plant grows, to discourage the plant from elongating its stems unnecessarily, and allow the plant to put more of that energy that it would have grown longer stems with into growing more flowers, fruits, and leaves, which is what we actually are designing our lights to do.
Good point. None of us are growing cannabis, or I should say most of us aren't growing cannabis for stems. So that's really the background of BDL, of Black Dog LED, and what we do and why we do it. So let's dive a little bit into our product history. As Kevin had said, we're on version 3, version 5, depending on how you count our revisions over the years. But we'll dive into a little bit of history and then we'll go into our current product line. So our history, what we started with was we had the very first 3-watt LED, all 3-watt LED grow light. That was cutting edge at the time. Since then, we've evolved to having 5-watt LEDs and delivering even larger lights. We used to top out around 750 watts. We now have our 1,000, which is 1,050 watts. But so we've grown from weaker LEDs as the technology's advanced, and we've moved into more powerful LEDs, and we actually have more colors to choose from as more colors are being released by the LED manufacturers. And we can bring those to bear on growing plants as we see fit. So we've developed from basically, back in the day, we had veg and flower lights. And we still get questions today about, hey, do you have a light for veg or flower? Or how do I change the spectrum? And years ago, we learned that that was not the way to go. We realized we were stuck in the paradigm of HPS and metal halide, where as a grower indoors personally, all I knew was, metal halide for veg or T5s maybe, and then HPS for flower. We all felt that's what you needed to do to grow cannabis. And it's not really the case. What we had learned was by developing the proper spectrum, which we can do with LEDs, unlike HPS or metal halide, if we have the proper spectrum, you can bring that to your plants, to your garden, from anything from seeds to clones to veg and flower. It all works the same. All you need to do is change the timing of your light cycle to elicit the flower response you're looking for. And so we have only one light, and we would never go back to that. Changing the spectrum is a bad thing, and it stalls out the plants and causes the things we don't want, which is decreased yields and stress on our plants and things of that nature. So we only have one spectrum now, and that's the phytogenesis spectrum, and that's what you'll find in the Phytomax 2 series.
Yeah, we actually found over the years of growing and experimentation that's changing out the spectrum. What people think you actually need to do to switch from veg to flower is counterproductive. It actually stalls out the plants. They stop growing for a bit while they're getting used to the new color of light, and you always end up with a lower yield and a lower quality harvest at the end of your grow as compared to using a fixed spectrum throughout the entire grow.
That's a good point. One of my favorite stories and how we first cued in on this was we had some growers, all of us have our favorite strains, right? And we had a grower contact us that was growing, if my memory serves me, it was LA Confidential, and they'd been growing the same cut for like 10 years. So they knew that cut inside and out. They knew exactly what it wanted, how long it took at different stages of growth. And they were using our lights in veg and in flower, the same spectrum. And what we saw was they contacted us, and they were wondering what we were doing that was causing their plants to finish sooner than they'd ever seen. Again, with 10 years of experience, they knew exactly when their trichomes should turn amber and where they should be, but they were getting to their finish 5 to 7 days earlier, which it took us a minute to figure out. But what we realized is by moving from veg to flower with the same spectrum and only changing the intensity and, of course, the light cycle, you caused very little stress on the plants, and therefore they didn't stall out as they were flipping them into flower, which is what you'd see coming from a metal halide or T5, let's say, over to HPS. You'd have a stall period. We eliminated that stall period by having the same spectrum throughout veg and flower. And what that did is it allowed their plants to immediately flip into flower with the lighting time change, and they therefore finished earlier. So it's definitely a learning process. And what we found is the single spectrum does a much better job of taking care of your plants and producing the yields you're looking for. So let's dive into the Phytomax 2 series, which is our current series, and go over what we've done with that light and what it does and what it will do for your garden.
Yeah, so with the Phytomax 2 series, which we first released at the beginning of 2017, we are switching out to a patented LED package, which allows us to eliminate the protective layer of glass that we used to have, and pretty much everyone else has to have underneath their LEDs. The patented LED package we use actually has a glass lens on the LEDs, which makes it mechanically and environmentally stable. You can touch the LEDs and not break them, not get shocked, as well as they are protected from the environment in terms of splashes or humidity in the air. By getting rid of the layer of glass or plastic underneath the LEDs, we were actually able to instantly get about a 10% improvement in efficiency, because that glass layer, even when it's perfectly clean, is blocking about 10% of the light. And then, of course, when it does get slightly smudged or dirty or dusty, it's blocking a lot more than 10% of the light. So by being able to get rid of that, we got 10% increase in efficiency right there. In addition, we are using only the top bin LEDs from individual manufacturers that specialize in the individual colors we use. So we use multiple different color LEDs in our lights to get the actual complete spectrum that we want. And we source each of those LEDs directly from the best manufacturer in the world for that particular color. Put them all into the same LED package so that we can run them all in the same light. And we get the best of breed that way in terms of getting the best efficiency out of our LEDs, best intensity out of our LEDs to get the actual spectrum we want. Now, our spectrum actually includes everything from ultraviolet all the way through infrared. Ultraviolet light does not necessarily help plants with photosynthesis directly, but it does elicit other responses in plants. Just like our skin will turn tan in response to exposure to ultraviolet light, plants do react to exposure to ultraviolet light, and how plants react depends on what kind of plant it is. But in general, it doesn't matter what kind of plant it is. Plants will exposed to ultraviolet light will grow thicker cell walls, which makes them a little bit more resistant to ultraviolet light. Also makes them more resistant to bacteria, fungi, insects, and other diseases. So unfortunately not immune, but it does make them more resistant to that. For lettuce growers, for example, they have demonstrated that lettuce has a 30% longer shelf life once it's picked if it has been exposed to ultraviolet light while it's growing, and that comes down to those thicker cell walls. Ultraviolet light also elicits other responses in plants. They typically produce more antioxidants when exposed to ultraviolet light. Those are things like anthocyanins, and in cannabis, that includes terpenes. So you're going to get a smellier, tastier harvest when it is actually exposed to ultraviolet light. Third, trichomes are actually produced in response to exposure to ultraviolet light. So by including UV in our spectrum, we actually get cannabis plants to create and produce more trichomes than they normally would when they're not exposed to ultraviolet light. Most people don't realize that high pressure sodium bulbs don't actually put out pretty much anything in the way of ultraviolet light. And unfortunately, a lot of the LED grow lights on the market that claim to have ultraviolet in their spectrum actually don't. And it's unfortunate because the human eye can't see ultraviolet as a separate color. So it's very easy to swindle people and not put ultraviolet LEDs in your light. So even people that think they've grown with ultraviolet before may not have actually seen what UV light can actually do for their crop. One of the last things that ultraviolet light actually does for increasing the quality of growth is because it has a higher energy than any other color visible light, it has more energy that it can lose before it becomes useless to the plant. So if you start off with an ultraviolet photon at the top of the canopy, it can actually go through leaves on its way down, losing energy with each leaf it's passing through and shifting to a lower energy photon from ultraviolet to blue to green to red, for example, and still be useful as a photosynthetic photon for the plant. So ultraviolet light actually increases canopy penetration and allows our lights just from the spectrum alone, intensity aside, just the spectrum alone actually increases canopy penetration, allowing you to get more light to those lower leaves, increase your yields, and increase the quality of the buds that you get further down on your stems.
That's a good point, Kevin. One thing I'd like to go back to, because so many of our customers do ask about our LEDs and what LEDs we use. And it's kind of a trick question in that we can't use any single manufacturer. We want the best of each color, as Kevin was saying, the best of breed, if you will, for each of the colors we need to build our phytogenesis spectrum. And so one of the challenges we have is no single manufacturer makes all the colors. That's just not the way LED manufacturers work. And Kevin could dive in briefly to explaining why we have to source from different ones, because a lot of people say, well, do you use Cree LEDs? Well, certainly we do for specific colors, and there's a reason we don't use them for all of the colors.
Yeah, so most people outside of the LED industry may not realize that the LEDs being manufactured around the world by only a handful of companies, and there's a ton of different LED brands on the market, but most of those, the actual silicon chip that makes the LED, that actually generates the light, is made by a relatively small handful of companies around the world, and each one specializes in a particular color of LED that they really focus on and really try and outdo all of their competition on. So Cree, as you had mentioned earlier, is a household brand name. Pretty much everyone has heard of Cree LEDs. And if you go to Cree's website, you can see that they sell different color LEDs. They've got blue LEDs, they've got white LEDs, they've got red LEDs. But the truth is, Cree only makes blue LEDs. That's the only thing they manufacture themselves. Now, they might coat some of them with a phosphor coating to turn it into a white LED that you can buy at Home Depot or in a lot of our competitors' so-called grow lights. But the underlying LED that Cree makes is a 450 nanometer blue. That's all they make. They don't make any other colors. Yes, they sell red LEDs. They don't actually make those themselves. They purchase those and package them from a different LED manufacturer. So we purchase a lot of our blue LEDs from Cree because they are the best in the world at making those specific LEDs. But if we're going to look at red LEDs, we're actually much better off getting those from the manufacturer that specializes in making red LEDs. That way we get the best ones, the most efficient ones we can, directly from the manufacturer.
Exactly. So that it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but unfortunately it's not easy to answer the question of what LEDs do you use. Again, we use 9 different colors, which is more than anyone else in the industry, because we believe one of the big advantages of LEDs is the ability to tune your spectrum. Back in the days of HPS, metal halide, T5s, all that, you are stuck with the color that those are going to output as they heat up and burn. So with LEDs, we're able to change out and play with the spectrum and get it tuned to where we want by picking different colors, putting them in different ratios, and as I said, building the best spectrum possible, again, which is our phytogenesis spectrum. So that really is the background of the Phytomax 2 spectrum and where we're at today with that. And then, as I'd mentioned earlier, power is another major focus for us because while LEDs are efficient and we can talk about the efficiency and we can talk about HPS, we can talk about that. At the end of the day, you need power to grow cannabis, to really get flowers. If we were growing lettuce or something that's just leaves, it doesn't matter. We could get away with a lot less power. But if we're going to grow anything, not just cannabis, but anything that's going to fruit or flower, and we're looking for that production, you do need relatively high amounts of power. So we'll go into the power now of our lights ranging from 200 to 1,000 watts.
Yeah, and one of the complications with power actually has to do with the spectrum a little bit as well. So there are the white LEDs I had talked about earlier, which are actually just a blue LED with a phosphor coating on top. And those have been developed specifically for applications, lighting areas for human use. And they've actually done a remarkably good job at getting the spectrum of those white LEDs to pretty much match exactly what the human eye wants to appear perfectly white and look very good and bright to our eyes. And they've got that down very good now where they're very efficient. You can replace a 100-watt incandescent bulb with 3 or 4 watts of LED light now, and it looks just as bright to the human eye, and it's just as efficacious to the human eye. So one of the problems that LED grow lights experienced when they were first released onto the market is a lot of people were seeing that, hey, you can replace these 1,000-watt high-pressure sodium bulbs in parking lots with a 250-watt LED light, and it looks just as bright to the human eye. So they assumed you could do the same thing with plants. So a lot of LED grow lights were put on the market, advertised as replacing a 1,000-watt high-pressure sodium bulb for growing purposes. They were actually only 200-300 watts. I've seen claims actually down to 70 watts of LEDs replacing a 1,000-watt high-pressure sodium bulb. And while for human eyes, you actually can replace a 1,000-watt HPS with a 250-watt LED and make it look as bright to human eyes, it doesn't work quite the same way with plants. Plants are not as specific in their spectral response in terms of photosynthesis as our eyes are specific in terms of how bright a light looks to our eyes, depending on the exact spectrum of light. So plants need more raw light power to actually photosynthesize, and certainly they need a lot more power than our eyes need to be able to read or see what we're doing. And 250 watts of LED lights does not replace a 1,000-watt high-pressure sodium bulb for growing purposes. But a lot of people got burned by that, and they made the assumption when they got one of these lights and tried growing with it and saw disappointing results, they made the assumption that LEDs don't work, when in fact, unfortunately, it was just that they had chosen a unfortunate choice for LED grow lights to try. So one of the things that we do maximize with our lights is the total power, the light output that they have. Now, we tune the spectrum not to look good for the human eye, but specifically for what plants can absorb most efficiently, as well as tuning the spectrum to get the plants to grow those shorter, stockier stems so that they put more of their energy into flowers and leaves instead of stems. But we actually provide, with the Phytomax 2, 5 different sizes of lights, same exact spectrum in all of them. The only real difference is the total number of LEDs and the total amount of light output between the 5 different sizes. And basically, we've got a 200 watt, 400 watt, 600 watt, 800 watt, and 1000 watt model. Now, our 600 watt model, for example, can replace a single-ended 1000 watt high pressure sodium for growing purposes. Get about the same yields out of our 600 watt light as you do out of a single-ended 1000 watt high pressure sodium. For double-ended high pressure sodium, you actually have to go up to our 800 watt LED grow light to replace a double-ended 1000 watt high pressure sodium bulb. Now, a lot of the double-ended fixtures allow you to crank their wattage up beyond 1000 watts, all the way up to some fixtures allow you to crank it up to about 1200 watts. And if you wanted to replace a 1200 watt double-ended high pressure sodium fixture with our lights, you'd actually need to go up to our 1000 watt LED to actually get equivalent or slightly better yields. But you're still saving 200 watts on your grow lights, and that equates not only to your power bill, but also dramatic decreases in the amount of cooling that you need to do.
So as Kevin was saying that he was talking about matching the yields with those power, the other thing is to note, even when you compare, like he said, our 600 against a single-ended HPS or 1000 against a double-ended HPS, while we will match or beat their yields, we will also guarantee you'll see higher quality. And that goes right back to our spectrum. That is the improved spectrum, where we're really controlling how the plant's going to grow and giving you with the UV the highest level quality you can get, both in terms of smell and taste, as well as potency, both for THC, CBD, and all of the different compounds you'd find in the trichomes.
And at Black Dog, we like being conservative with our yield comparisons. Because LED grow lights have such a bad name on the market, and so many people have been disappointed by their LED grows before, we try to put out very conservative comparisons of our lights to traditional high pressure sodium lights, so that the first time you grow with a Black Dog LED, you will be pleasantly surprised at the actual increased yield. I mean, we've had multiple documented grows now with our Phytomax 2 1000 light that have hit over 3.6 pounds, including the 2017 California Grow Off, ironically sponsored by Gavita, was actually won by an individual that was using our Phytomax 2 1000 light and hit, I believe it was over 3.72 pounds with a single plant. Yep.
It was impressive. And he took third place for potency. So not only did he bring the yields, but he also got one of the highest potencies out of the entire competition. So the goal obviously is we all want yields and quality. We don't want to give up quality to improve yields. We want everything to go together. And he certainly proved that to be true. So let's dive into the important question. You know, we get a lot of these questions that we're covering. And one of the questions we get obviously most commonly is, what can I expect with your lights? Or how many plants can I grow with your lights? Or this, that. We don't ever really look at the plant count because it's not a unit of measure. We want to know about canopy. So whether you have a 2x2, a 3x3, a 4x4, or 50,000 square feet for a commercial facility, that's what we want to look at, not the plant count. And so when we talk about yields, we're really talking about area. However, we've learned by growing with our LEDs for many years that area is somewhat flexible. So we can use our 1000 over a 4x4 or a 5x5, and if run properly, you're going to get about the same amount of yield out of those two gardens. There are reasons you might want to go with the 4x4 or 5x5, but your yield's going to be about the same because, as Kevin pointed out, the energy we're putting into that tent with that light's the same, so your yields are going to be about the same. So let's talk about yields. I'm going to throw some caveats out there because we have to. As Kevin said, we're very conservative, but we also like to make sure that we're clear about numbers. So with the following assumptions, we can give you numbers. We assume that you have some grower skills. If you're a beginner, your first run, we always like to say you might get absolutely no yields out of your garden. And if you get even a gram of consumable out of your garden in your first run, you're ahead of the game. Plenty of people do a first run and don't make it to the finish. So let's assume you have some grower skills to begin with.
And obviously, if you forget to water your plants for 3 weeks, that we can't guarantee you any yields if that happens. So grower skills are important.
Yeah, Kevin's alluding to our favorite support call of all time, where somebody called and said that our light killed his plant. And of course, we want to know what happened right away. And we started asking questions and came to find out that that person thought our lights were so amazing that they didn't have to water the plants. And our lights are amazing, but they don't do that. So
yeah, you still have to water your plants.
So assuming you have some grower skills, the next assumption is you have a good growing environment. Whether it's a closet, an entire room, a warehouse, or a grow tent, you need to have a good environment. And there we're talking about temperature, humidity, and managing your environment. Also fresh air, getting CO2 in there, turning the air over, and keeping everything under control. So if you need to have a good environment there.
And that includes keeping out bacteria and insects and fungus. So it's not difficult to maintain a good environment, but it is difficult to get it set up and dialed in the first time. I've set up a lot of indoor grows over the years and have a lot of experience doing that. And despite that, they are never perfect the first time I run in them.
Yeah, and to point out, every indoor garden is different. I can take a tent, set it up in my basement, and then if I have to set that exact same tent and exact same garden up in someone else's house or in a different location, you can guarantee that garden's going to act differently than it did in my basement. So even the same grow space moved to a different ambient environment is going to change your grow dramatically. So just something to keep in mind. So the final thing, of course, is genetics. And I would say I saved the best for last because it's probably it's going to impact your yields probably more than anything, more than our light, more than your nutrients, more than anything, right? So there are no strains we know of out there. We've all heard, Girl Scout cookies or some of the OGs. Those are lower producing strains. People still grow them because they want the quality they produce or the particular genetic they're growing, or they want that flavor, whatever reason. We have no problem growing low yielding strains, but of course you're not going to hit the same numbers as a more generic strain or a high yielding strain. So let's recap. If you have good skills, a good environment, and good genetics, what we would tell you is it's fairly simple. Our 200 starts at a half a pound, and then every light step up you go up to the 1,000 is a half a pound. So the 200's a half pound, the 400's 1 pound, the 600's 1.5 pounds, the 800's 2, and the 1,000 is 2.5. Now, as Kevin said, we are very conservative, and we have multiple proven grows with 1,000 over 3.5 pounds. But still, the number we quote is 2.5 pounds because we want our customers to have success. And if you can hit, or if you can strive for a realistic number, you're going to have a much better chance of success.
And the reason we throw out these numbers as far as yield per light is because actually we've never yet grown with our lights, with these lights, and not gotten well over those numbers. So again, very conservative. You should be able to hit half a pound with the Phytomax 200. It doesn't require amazing genetic strains, just not ones that are known to be low yielding strains.
Yeah, I mean, we've pulled, for example, on the 200, we've pulled well over 10 ounces with just that little 210 watt light in a nice growing space. So again, those are conservative numbers. So if those yields are there and you want to see some of them, the best place to check out some of our grow history is on YouTube. We have multiple time lapses up there, both commercial and home grows. And we found that there were a lot of people kind of playing with videos where we felt it wasn't being perfectly honest. Maybe they had changed the lights out. So we try to do time lapses as much as possible so that you can really see the grow from beginning to end, minute by minute, real quickly, and get a view of the grow and how it turned out. So welcome you to check out our channel on YouTube. All you got to do is go to YouTube and search for Black Dog LED and you'll find it. The other thing is on our site, you can definitely find some of our pictures, but I would recommend social media as well. We are constantly posting new information and new grows and new pictures and new setups on our different social media accounts. Obviously, Instagram is a good one because it's so photo forward and we have a lot of good imagery there. But then you could use Twitter, you go Facebook, any of those we're active on. But I definitely recommend if you want to see these things and pick some of the tips up there as well, go ahead and follow us in any of our social media platforms.
So that kind of brings our first introductory podcast to a close, but wanted to kind of finish off with a list of topics that we'd like to eventually cover in our podcast here, hopefully over the next several weeks. Things such as lights in plants are not a unit of measurement. We get questions all the times of how many plants can I grow with this light? Well, it depends on what size the plants are. Things such as the new Massachusetts commercial wattage requirement regulations and how that actually will affect the commercial cannabis growing industry. Simpler things such as autoflowers versus day length sensitive plants and which might make sense for you to grow. And the answer is it depends on exactly what you're looking to do. They each have advantages and disadvantages. Things such as proactive pest management and dealing with pests indoors and taking proactive management of them with biological controls and other things you can do, because everyone that's been growing indoors long enough has dealt with pests far more than we actually want to. Topics like soil versus hydro, which one is the best? And again, it really just depends on exactly what you want to do. Cannabis growing methodologies, the sea of green versus the giant plants where you're getting 1.5 to 3 pounds per plant. Very different methodologies. Which one actually works out best? Different nutrients that can be used for cannabis, ways of measuring light intensity and quality, as well as efficiency of lights and looking at different measurements of efficiency. So we've got a lot of different topics that we'd like to cover. And if anyone has any suggestions or questions for topics that they would like to see covered, please get in touch with us and let us know.
Thanks, Kevin. So thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this installment of the Cultivation Cast by Black Dog LED. If you have any questions about the content you heard or have an idea for a future topic, please send an email to us at podcast@blackdogled. Again, that's podcast, podcast, @blackdogled.com. Have a great day and happy gardening.